Welcome to Charter Conversations. I'm Dru Damico, President of Building Hope Real Estate. My guest today is Mark Thaler. Mark leads the education practice for Gensler, a global architecture and design firm. Hi, Mark. Welcome to Charter Conversations.
Hi, Dru. It's really great to be here. I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
So, just give our viewers a quick introduction on yourself and Gensler.
Well, let's see. I've been at Gensler over 16 years now. I lead our education practice in New York, and I lead a studio of about 25 people. And Gensler is, we like to call ourselves the world's largest design organization, but we're also really, really small in that we are committed to the communities that we serve. We get very deeply embedded in our communities, and we have practices that span from education is one of our key practices, but we do retail and hospitality. We have health and wellness. We have a very multidisciplinary practice, and we have groups that practice master planning and building design, interiors, design experience, graphics. We have a whole group of people. We're quite we call ourselves a bit of a design think tank.
How did you become an architect? Tell me about your journey and background.
When people ask me that question, I like to say that it all began with a pair of right-handed scissors. My kindergarten teacher, I'm left-handed, and my kindergarten teacher was trying to force me to use right-handed scissors, and it was not going well. And so my parents decided that maybe traditional education wasn't going to pan out for me. So I spent the first, I don't know, probably up until sixth grade in an organization called the Center for Open Education. It was in the late 60s. It was started, and it was in this sort of cleaned out office building, and we did project-based work, a lot of the things that we're talking about now as an educational trend, but we did a lot of project-based learning. By sixth grade, I had done a film on the Revolutionary War, and I built a yurt. The problem was that at that point, I still couldn't do fractions. So my parents pivoted me into a much more traditional learning environment. And the first few years didn't go very well, but it was after that, it was probably seventh or eighth grade where I realized that I loved science, I loved art. And that was when I decided that architecture was probably the confluence of those things where I could express myself creatively, but it also had that kind of rigor to it. It wasn't a pure art form, it had that rigor to it that I really enjoyed. So I took a journey. I became an engineer, then I became an architect, and so here I am.
Years ago, when I first started doing development, I was developing historic theaters, and one of the major operators around the country that we were working with, just gave me some great advice, and the advice was really the experience of a theater starts, on the block. It reminds me a lot of schools. And that schools start at home in the morning, and as they arrive, and as students arrive to school, and then how they get back home, right? It's an overall experience, right? Just like the theater was an experience from start to finish. Is there an equivalent for schools? And how do you think about designing schools from sort of start to finish, from the time a student arrives at school to the time that it's time to go home?
So when we have the opportunity to design a new building for a charter school, we think about things like beacons and messaging and signage, that the building itself becomes that marker in the urban context or the suburban context, where a student from wherever they're walking or wherever they're arriving, they can see it. Then when they get to the front door, that front door becomes a threshold, and how those students are greeted at the front door, the kind of space that they immediately enter into. Do they enter into a narrow hallway that takes them right up to their classroom, or is there this transition space where students can gather, where they can hang out before school starts, where they can meet with teachers, where teachers can see the students and greet them as they come in? That sort of transition zone is so exceptionally important to the experience of transitioning from their home life to the school life. And one of the things we've learned about charters, or we know about charters, is that they are an incredible component of the academic, the social, and emotional aspect of these students' lives. And so the importance of acknowledging that through design, through creating those spaces, through creating those moments where students can come in and gather themselves and get ready for their day is so critically important. So I agree with you, Drew, 100% that the experience of going to school it really starts the moment you see your building and you see the people that you are going to spend that day with, the part of your community, and you can't shortchange that transitional experience from the front door into the classroom.
Mark, Genslers does quite a bit of research on an annual basis. Can you tell me about some of the research that your group does for education?
Yeah, absolutely. The Gensler Research Institute was founded uh, as a sort of internal organization within the larger firm at Gensler. It was founded about 7 years ago, maybe even 8, 9 years ago, and the firm really realized that in order to make more impact in our projects and our clients, we needed to step back and have our practitioners really think about the issues and learn about the issues that our clients are facing. So the way the firm sets this up is every year there is a call for proposals, and every practice area is requested to submit grant proposals. And so over the years, I've been fortunate to lead teams. I think education was probably one of the first practice areas in the firm to receive a research grant. And we started with a student survey, and it was about 2,500 college and university students across the United States, asking them questions about where are the best places to learn, how is technology improving, or is it a detriment to learning. And we learned so much at that time, and since then we've done research on STEM environments for K-12 schools. We did a 3-year study on libraries. We've done research on learning environments. We've done research on rapid prototyping, and then we've also done research where we go back and we do post-occupancy analysis of some of the spaces that we've actually designed. So we can take insights from things that we've done and then share them out, and teach about methodologies for post-occupancy analysis.
I've been struggling, Mark, with this idea of libraries um, in schools and what the future of libraries in schools looks like. For me, it seems as though a school without a library is like a human without a soul. And nowadays libraries are changing and evolving. Will they exist in the future? I mean, how do you see the future of libraries?
At the heart of a school or the heart of a campus has always been this idea of a library. And behind the library has been this idea that it's the place of scholarly research, it's the place of repose, of quiet study, and a place where you can go where you know that what you're going to be doing there is highly engaged in academics. But the library was formulated at a time when the access to information wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. So we spent a lot of time talking to librarians. We spent a lot of time, we developed a tool that allowed us to record the activities that were happening in a library. And then we also spoke with students and with library leaders together to try to understand what attitudes of the library now and in the future would be. And what we came to was a couple things. One is that the idea of the library as a place of focus was really never going to go away. When you go to a library, the expectation is you're going to be able to focus there. The next question we always focus on is, well, what are you doing about books? You know, what do books mean? Are books symbolic, or do they have a real function? And until we can really get an answer to that, we can't really take the next step in designing these libraries. So usually where we wind up is that there's kind of this core collection, depending on the grade and depending on the school. There's this core collection of books that are really necessary to have there. But then we look at this idea of other activities. We look at this idea of teamwork, collaboration, creating collaboration spaces. And then thinking about the role of the librarian as no longer a person who's going to help somebody find a book through the Dewey Decimal System. They're really more coaches and collaborators where they try to understand what a student is doing, how can they guide them to the right online sources, how can they make suggestions as to that student's process. So it's really much more of a centralized activity hub. We're seeing a lot of things like fab labs and maker spaces also going into the library. Again, this relationship between books and technology and making and doing and student engagement, but always trying to maintain this idea that the library needs to be first and foremost a place of focus.
What's a fab lab?
So a fab lab, it's a fabrication lab. You know, you hear things like 3D printers and maker spaces, routers and tools. You know, a fab lab is a place where students can tinker, where they can make, where they can take classroom assignments, where they can use computer-driven software to make things where you know, a prototype is really the only way that they can iterate on a particular problem. So a fab lab could be a glorified art room where they're just putting pieces of cardboard together, and it can be as sophisticated as you know, a maker space with 3D printers and maker bots and those sorts of tools that are a little bit more sophisticated. So the key to a fab lab is that you're fabricating, you're making something, and you're testing it, and then it's a place for iteration and exploration.
I was thinking, Mark, about the design meetings that we had last week, and we've been sitting with schools, thinking, going through their designs and their plans for their new facility that'll open up next year or the year after, and and it hit me that um, we really need to think about where we are today and what that means for design in the future. What advice do you have for schools as they think about designing new facilities in the future?
Right now, our impression is, and our experience has been in working with school leaders that, you know, between now and 4 weeks from now, the thinking has to be around keeping students and families and keeping them safe, adopting hybrid technologies. The idea about what spatial implications of the future are going to be is really interesting because, you know, we've been doing some internal studies where um, we looked at some of the schools that we charter schools and public schools that we designed prior to COVID. And it was really all based on this module of a classroom that can accommodate 30 students in what you might call a traditional setting. I know a lot of schools work outside that traditional setting, but the idea of desks and rows, you know, really having that teacher be the focus of the conversation. But we looked at some of the other kinds of environments that we're designing to have a little bit more reconfigurability to create other learning modes. And what we discovered was that a classroom that can accommodate a reconfigurable setting is about the same size as a classroom with that same number of students spaced 6 feet apart for COVID. What that sort of set off for us was, I think there's going to be a move towards larger spaces that are reconfigurable, that also are not, the word I'm looking for, I guess, is singular purpose. This idea that a classroom can only be one thing, a cafeteria can only be one thing, a gym can only be one thing. What we've learned through all of this is that any space in an ideal world should be able to transform to anything at any time. And what a school leader will gain from that is a facility that can be resilient and that can be adaptable to any change. We don't know whether the next crisis is going to be a pandemic or it's going to be something else that's going to enable or allow or require students to have to move into different settings. In addition, we don't know where curriculum is going as well. So if you can design a space that's really a kit of parts that allows school leaders and teachers and innovators to come in and recalibrate the school over time, then you have something that, you know, that's that when we say resilience, We don't mean something that can stand up to a hurricane. I mean, of course, that's really important as well. But resilience means that your school can adapt over time, and that by using things like post occupancy evaluations to really see how you're using that space, the less purpose built, and you have to, I know there are spaces that you have to purpose build, but the less purpose built spaces that you can put in a school, the more adaptable and resilient you'll be over time.
Design plays a role in student outcomes. Do you have an example of a school that you've worked with where you felt um, it was integral to supporting the educational goals and student outcomes?
Yeah, a project I love to talk about is our work at the Dwight Englewood School in New Jersey. It's a school we've been working with probably since 2011, where we did a master plan, and it's one of those relationships where we've been working so closely with them and got and the process that we went through with that school also was quite similar to what I've been saying about um, getting students and families and faculty and getting people engaged in the process. And we really learned what their overarching desire was. One of the key ideas behind it was putting learning on display and getting students engaged. And one aspect of that project was robotics. And the robotics lab previously was just a club, and it was in a classroom located in a different part of the campus. And so it was on the part of the head of school and the robotics teacher. They wanted to put it front and center. So we created this large flat floor space where it was there were adjacent cubbies where students could put bins of their work. There were large work tables, and it was surrounded by the main circulation where people could look down on the space. And one of the immediate outcomes was that as students saw what robotics was all about, they got interested. They wanted to learn more about it. They joined the club. They tripled their enrollment in the club. They then started a varsity team and a junior varsity team. And within 3 years of the school opening, they had an international team that won global competitions. So, this idea of, one of the outcomes that we strive to succeed in is engagement. And when you can put activities and learning on display and you can create interest and curiosity in students, we think that that's a very positive outcome that design can help influence.
Who needs to be at the table when schools are thinking about design for both long-term projects and sort of pressing short-term issues such as COVID?
We believe that as many voices as you can get to the table as you can is really important. Charter schools are communities. They're built on trust. They're built on the engagement, the required engagement of students, their families, teachers, administrators, funders. So we like to hold what we call vision sessions. We've done this for almost every one of the charter schools that we've designed, where we bring in stakeholders. We hold town halls with community members. We get insights and feedback before these processes begin, before we start designing schools. Because what we found is that if you try to shortchange that process and you try to bring in uh, a design to a community that hasn't been reached out to at the beginning, you can get a lot of resistance. And so we find that the conversations are richer, the designs are richer, the program actually can be impacted by bringing in the community from the very beginning, bringing the student voice, bringing the parent voice, bringing the teacher voice, and really listening.
Certainly, the world has changed, and I think that we're all out there in a way to create a positive experience and a sense of place for these kids and for teachers and for families when they send their kids to school. And I don't think those things are necessarily, uh, you know, competing with each other when smart people are sitting around a table trying to solve them for the benefit of all.
Oh, I agree. I agree. It's kind of what I was saying. The more voices you can bring to the table, um, you know, seek out the help of professionals. And there are people who are much smarter than I am about security. There are people who are much smarter than I am about mechanical systems. All of those things go into creating a safe school, a safe environment. And in the design profession, we're here, we're all out there, trying to help in any way we can. I think sitting across the table with all of these people, I think can really help a school think through the problem.
What are things that you think about, and what tools do you have with respect to getting the word out about things that leaders could do to improve school safety?
The first was, and all of our practice areas did this. We created a COVID page on our website where school leaders can actually go, and they can, whether you're a K-12 leader, or you belong to an institution of higher education, you can go onto our COVID page, and you can see all of the work that we've been doing as a firm, whether it's thinking about healthcare in the age of COVID, workplace, airports. But we probably have 5 or 6 blogs that we've written about education, whether it's 6 strategies for transitioning back to school, or thinking about what an equitable future might look like, things for school leaders to think about, as thinking about COVID not as a now, but sort of how do you catapult beyond COVID and think about the future of your organizations. So our blogs are there for anybody to download.
Going back a little bit to where we are now today with COVID, you have, I believe Gensler has come up with a way using artificial intelligence to sort of map schools. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
So we developed a tool called Graph. And what Graph does is it takes the power of our building information modeling and overlays the idea of movement and space on top of that. And we have 3 different ways that we're approaching that. The one that you're mentioning, we're calling Scenario Graph. And what Scenario Graph does is it can calculate for different social distancing scenarios what your ideal occupancy can be on a particular floor or in a particular space. But on top of that, it can also map pathways. So it can calculate where people will want to go from the spaces that they're in. So, for example, from a classroom to a stair, or from an office to a bathroom. We can plot those lines, and we can create heat maps where we think uh, collisions will be, and then we can take design interventions and test them about whether to see if whether or not that will alleviate the pressure point. And so this, in what we can do in virtual space, is actually create scenarios that can be tested before you move a wall or break down a wall. And so we're starting to adapt this. This was, like I said, it was primarily created for workplace, these very heavily dense workplace environments, but we're starting to use it now in classrooms, where we can start to map movement through corridors, movements to stairs. We can start to create scenarios where we can figure out how long it takes a student through a check-in process to get from the front door to a classroom. We're finding that there's amazing potential in this tool, and we've only just started to use it, but we think that its potential is huge.
But I wonder if there's this larger learning um, that we're all mutually responsible for, so that if something like this happens again, we're able to really figure out the best practice to move forward and have that playbook. Um, is there anything going on with that around the country that you know of?
Well, we've developed our back to school guidebook for higher ed and for K-12 schools, and many design firms have. I think what's great about these types of guidebooks is that they take spatial guidelines like the CDC and the NIH, and they spatialize them. So for people who really want to see what the impact of social distancing on classrooms, on auditoria, on libraries, on building lobbies, that's what these things are good for. But I think, to your point, they're really just snapshots in time. And what we could see, and what we're trying to pull together, is a guidebook or a playbook for where this might be a part of it, but it's really a guidebook for developing a school and developing a school that allows it to be agile and resilient and equitable. And those are really those are the things that we uh, our research kind of pulls us in that direction. Our experience with charter schools kind of pulls us in that direction, coming up with strategies. For example, um, one of the conversations that we've been having over the years, we've been working with a school called Da Vinci, and uh, they've actually been operating in their system. They've been operating a hybrid school for the past 7 or 8 years. And they were hybrid before hybrid was something that was even on the tip of anybody's tongue. So these different kinds of modalities that schools can operate in as a sort of guidebook, starting with some of the things we were talking about before, like a playbook for consensus building, a playbook for design thinking, a playbook for programming, a playbook for pulling a vision out, a playbook for design, a playbook for post-occupancy evaluation. That's how you create resilient schools. You have this playbook that, yes, social distancing is an important part of it, but it's a chapter in this larger, I think, um, overall aspirational guidebook that can take a school from start to finish, where you can tune in to say, okay, I really want to learn about how do I create a more hybrid environment? What are the things I need to design in?
Do you see any silver lining in COVID and how it might influence long-term thinking to school design for the better? And are you seeing anything now in schools and how they're adapting and that could be beneficial to teach and any learning whenever schools go back?
I think where COVID has made people pause is this idea of, and it's not to say that people have figured out the answer, but the question is, where is school actually? And what is school actually? And what is the role of technology that can help schools? Not, don't, there are some schools out there that really have embraced this idea of hybrid learning, of saying, look, I know that not every one of my students uh, thrives in a traditional classroom setting. And I also know that some of my students actually did really, really well working online. So why is that? And can I create an environment, a curriculum, a pedagogy that allows me to reach across this spectrum of all these different learners? So I think that's a real silver lining, to be able to say we have to be able to serve students who learn differently, and that technology can help, and that school, maybe in school, isn't for everybody. And I'm not suggesting that there's a solution or that hybrid learning is right for every single school, but I think just exposing these sorts of issues, I think, will help in the future. The other thing is, for better or worse, it's also exposed the inequities that exist within our school systems. And the idea of access to computers, access to broadband, access to a safe and comfortable place, the kind of basic human need of a place to work and sit in peace. I think it's exposed that as well. And while the inequities in the system are tragic, I think by exposing them, hopefully it can get on its way to really thinking about how to solve those in the future.
Well, Mark, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate getting to know you and getting to know the way you and Gensler thinks about designing great educational spaces in buildings, and just really appreciate your work. Thank you very much for joining and talking to me today.
Thanks so much, Drew, for the opportunity. Thanks for reaching out and inviting me. And I want to end by saying, just repeating that I do believe that our school leaders are heroes. They're the frontline workers. They're the ones who are out there. And if there's anything that myself or I represent our entire practice area of committed professionals across the United States and abroad, and we're just here to help. And sometimes we may not know any more than you do, but certainly we're here to help you brainstorm.
And thank you for watching today. It has been great to talk to Mark, and some of those concepts of resilience and adaptability and engagement. I think are concepts that we really need right now as teachers and students are heading back to school. And at Building Hope, we want you to know that we are with you, and we look forward to a successful school year, whatever that looks like for you.